and go back, not to your memories, but to your feelings, the ones you don't talk about, the ones buried beneath years of survival, duty, and distraction, the ones tied to your mother. Your mother was your first emotional mirror. Not just a caregiver, but the blueprint of your inner world. From the moment you entered this world, your senses were not yet developed enough to distinguish language or logic. You did not understand words, but you deeply understood energy. Her tone, her eyes, her touch, the rhythm of her heartbeat. These were the first codes of reality written into your nervous system. You did not observe your environment as separate from you. You became what you felt. You absorbed what was around you without questioning it, without resisting it, because in that early stage of life, the boundaries of self had not yet formed, and the person closest to you, the one whose presence was most constant, was your mother. If she was warm, your body learned to relax. If she was anxious, your system learned to tighten. If she smiled, you felt safe. If she disappeared emotionally, you felt abandoned, even if you couldn't articulate it. These moments were not minor. They were programming your nervous system, shaping your emotional map, and silently deciding how you would one day relate to yourself and to the world. You did not simply learn what love is. You became what love looked like in her presence. And whatever you became, you began to repeat, not because it made sense, but because it was familiar. Now, as adults, many people don't realize that what they believe to be personality is often a collection of adaptations made in early childhood. These adaptations were responses to the cues they received from their caregivers, especially their mother. If love was conditional, you became a perfectionist. If love was chaotic, you became hypervigilant. If love was absent, you became emotionally numb. And because the child doesn't understand circumstances, the child only absorbs experience, these emotional patterns felt natural, even when they were painful. This is what it means when we say your mother was your first emotional mirror. She did not simply reflect your image. She reflected back to you the first messages about who you are, whether or not you are safe, worthy, lovable. This is why many people find themselves caught in emotional loops they cannot explain. They struggle with relationships, self-worth, trust, boundaries, not because they are broken, but because they are repeating emotional templates written in the earliest years of life. And at the center of those templates, often, is the figure of the mother. She did not intentionally shape all these things. Much of it happened unconsciously, but the emotional imprint remained. Her presence, or lack of presence, her touch, her emotional availability, her reactions, her silences. They became the architecture of your emotional life. Understanding this does not mean blaming her. It means realizing that your emotional responses today were once survival strategies. That your way of coping, reacting, or even shutting down, all of it began in that silent, wordless space between you and her. And until you become aware of this connection, until you understand how deeply her presence shaped your identity, you may find yourself living out patterns without ever knowing why. You may seek love the way you received it. You may fear rejection the way you once feared her disappointment. You may internalize shame because her unhealed pain once made her emotionally unavailable. To understand this is not to judge. It is to awaken. It is to become conscious of the origin of your wounds, not to blame her, but to reclaim the parts of you that were lost while you were unconsciously trying to be the version of yourself that felt acceptable in her presence. Healing is blocked not by events, but by your misunderstanding of her humanity. Most people believe their emotional pain is tied directly to what happened in their past, specific incidents, words, absences, or betrayals. But more often than not, what continues to cause suffering is not the event itself, but the way we interpreted that event through the limited understanding we had as children. And when the person involved is your mother, that misunderstanding runs deep, because you did not see her as a person. You saw her as everything. The mind of a child cannot separate love from survival, cannot differentiate between her limitations and your worth. If she yelled, you felt shame. If she withdrew, you felt unlovable. If she was overprotective, you felt incapable. And if she broke down emotionally, you felt responsible. But what if the pain you carry is not about what happened, but about the story you wrote about it? A story you never had the tools to question. What if the story you hold is built on the belief that your mother should have been more than human, should have loved without condition, should have known what you needed even when she was drowning in her own silence? This misunderstanding, this expectation, is what keeps the wound open. Because as long as you see her only through the lens of what she failed to give you, you cannot begin to understand who she was beyond the role of mother. She may have been carrying traumas of her own, unresolved from generations before her. She may have never had a space to be seen, heard, or understood. She may have been taught that emotions were weakness, or that love must be earned. She may have had to silence her pain to keep a family together, or carry the weight of expectations that never allowed her to fully live. And yet, in your eyes, she remained only one thing: mother, not a person with layers, with dreams, with grief, with scars, but a symbol of what you did or did not receive. This is where healing remains stuck, not because of what she did, but because of what you believe she should have been. That belief keeps your heart closed, keeps your compassion locked away, and keeps your healing out of reach. When you carry the image of her as perfect, or as perfectly harmful, you deny her complexity, and in doing so, you deny your own growth. Because healing is not the erasing of pain, it is the expansion of perspective. It is the moment when you can look at her and see not just the mother, but the woman, fragile, flawed, trying, hurting, surviving. Without this understanding, your wounds calcify into identity. You begin to say things like, "I was never loved," or "she never cared," or "I wasn't enough," without seeing that these conclusions were made by a younger version of you who didn't know how to interpret emotional distance, silence, or inconsistency. And because the mind does not like unfinished stories, it clings to these interpretations as if they are truth. But truth requires maturity. It requires revisiting those memories not from the wounded child, but from the conscious adult, the one who can hold contradiction, who can see pain without assigning blame, who can acknowledge loss without making it a prison. When you stop expecting her to be what she was never given the tools to become, you create space. Space to grieve the ideal, space to understand the real, space to begin a relationship not rooted in unmet need, but in honest presence. This is where healing lives, not in rewriting history, but in seeing it with new eyes, not in denying the hurt, but in understanding the humanity behind it. You must see your mother as a woman with her own wounds, not just as mom. For much of your life, your understanding of your mother was filtered through the lens of what she was supposed to be for you. A provider, a protector, a nurturer, a guide. And when she failed to meet those expectations, whether through absence, control, emotional distance, or inconsistency, something inside you silently kept record, not always in anger, but in confusion, in unmet needs, in silent disappointments that accumulated without language. And yet, rarely do we pause to see the person behind the role. Rarely do we ask ourselves who she was before she became our mother, what dreams she gave up, what traumas she never healed, what burdens she carried long before we ever came into her world. From childhood, the mother is often perceived as all-knowing, all-powerful. She is the one we run to for comfort, the one we cry to when the world feels unsafe. And this perception creates a kind of emotional blindness. A belief that she exists solely in relation to us, that her purpose begins and ends with our care. But this is not true. Long before she held you, she was shaped by her own mother, by her culture, by society's expectations, by invisible forces that may have broken her spirit in ways you'll never fully understand. And the pain she carried, she did not always speak of. Because maybe she wasn't allowed. Maybe she didn't know how. Maybe silence was her only form of survival. When you see her only as mom, you overlook the human being who has stumbled through life just like you have. You forget that the one who didn't give you the tenderness you needed may have never received tenderness herself. You forget that the one who tried to control you may have grown up in an environment where fear ruled every choice. You forget that the one who seemed emotionally unavailable may have spent years shutting down her feelings to avoid drowning in them. And when you hold her to an image of perfection, when you say, she should have known better, or she should have done more, you compare her to a fantasy, not to reality. The truth is, your mother is not just your mother. She is a woman who may have been scared, lost, unsupported, or silenced. A woman who may have spent her entire life giving pieces of herself away, without ever being asked how she truly felt. A woman who may have been exhausted. Not because she didn't love you, but because she didn't know how to love herself. And when you allow yourself to see her as such, something inside you begins to shift. Not into denial, not into excusing pain, but into clarity, into maturity, into wholeness. This shift doesn't erase the ways you were hurt. It doesn't dismiss the fact that you needed more than she could give. But it places your pain in a wider context. One that includes her own story, not just yours. And from that context, empathy begins to grow. You begin to realize that what she gave, or didn't give, was often not about you at all, but about what she had access to within herself. And when you see that clearly, you stop taking her limitations personally. You stop defining yourself by what she couldn't provide. You stop measuring your worth against her ability to love perfectly. Seeing your mother as a woman is not a betrayal. It is an awakening. It is the moment when the child inside you no longer demands the impossible, and the adult within you begins to understand the complexity of love, of failure, of humanity. You start to witness the layers of her life, the quiet battles, the silent griefs, the broken hopes she may have buried deep beneath her duties. You begin to realize that even if she never said it, she too may have been longing, not just for healing, but for the freedom to be seen as more than just someone's mother. Emotional pain often comes from unmet expectations rooted in childhood perceptions. As children, we enter the world with no context, no logic, only instinct and emotion. We form our understanding of life not from facts, but from feelings. Not from explanations, but from experiences. In the earliest moments of life, our emotional needs are simple but powerful: to be seen, to be safe, to be soothed, to be loved. And when these needs are not met consistently, the child does not question the caregiver. The child questions themselves. The child assumes, something must be wrong with me. This innocent conclusion becomes the seed of self-doubt, and over time, grows into emotional pain that lives quietly beneath the surface. These unmet needs turn into expectations, not conscious ones, but unconscious emotional contracts. If I am good, I will be loved. If I stay silent, I will not be hurt. If I make her proud, she will stay close. These contracts are not fair, but they feel necessary to survive. The problem arises when these early contracts follow us into adulthood. We begin to seek validation from others in the same patterns we tried with our mother. We chase love with the same desperation, avoid conflict with the same fear, or suppress our emotions with the same silence we learned as children. And we wonder why we feel stuck, why we overact, why we feel abandoned even in relationships that are safe. Much of this emotional pain is not from the original wound itself, but from the expectation that someone else should now fill it. We expect our partner to love us unconditionally, not realizing that this expectation was first placed on a mother who may have never had that kind of love to give. We expect the world to reassure us, to notice us, to never leave us. But these expectations were shaped long ago, in the moments when our cries were ignored, when our joy was unnoticed, when our sadness was misunderstood. What's painful is not always what happened. What's painful is that we're still looking for it to be fixed in the same way it broke in through someone else. These childhood perceptions, though formed by a young, emotional mind, remain unexamined in many people's lives. We grow up, but the perceptions remain frozen. We become adults, but part of us is still that child, waiting, hoping, aching for something that may never come. And because we don't realize this, we continue to place the same expectations on others and feel disappointed again and again. Emotional pain deepens each time our adult reality fails to deliver on a childhood hope. And yet we often don't look back. We don't trace the pain to its origin. We say, why can't they just love me right? Or, why do I always feel unseen? But the question behind the question is this: what was I expecting? And when did I first begin expecting it? That's where the insight lies. That's where healing begins. Not in blaming our past, but in recognizing that our inner world is still shaped by it. When you begin to see how these expectations were formed, you start to loosen their hold. You start to question whether they are still relevant, still necessary, still true. You start to realize that your mother's inability to meet your emotional needs does not mean those needs are invalid. It just means she didn't have the capacity. And her limitations are not your identity. The feelings you carry are real, but the stories you built around them may not be. That's the distinction that opens the door to growth. The realization that your perception, while deeply felt, was shaped in a moment when you didn't yet understand the complexity of people, the depth of wounds, or the weight of unspoken burdens. True healing begins when judgment is replaced with compassionate understanding. Many people carry pain not just because of what happened to them, but because of the meaning they attach to it. Judgment is often the default response to hurt. We judge the people who caused it, we judge ourselves for feeling it, and we judge the world for allowing it. When it comes to a mother, this judgment can be especially heavy because she is the one person we were supposed to trust, the one who was meant to nurture us, to protect us, to love us unconditionally. And when she failed to meet those expectations, the pain left behind did not just create wounds, it created conclusions. She didn't love me. I wasn't enough. She didn't care. These conclusions become beliefs, and beliefs shape how we see everything, including ourselves. But what if those beliefs are not entirely true? What if they are only a piece of a much larger, more complex story? Compassion does not mean denying the hurt. It means making space to see more than just your version of events. It means asking deeper questions. Who was she before she became my mother? What pain did she carry that I never saw? What burdens did she bear that made her emotionally unavailable, or overwhelmed, or distant? These are not questions that excuse harmful behavior, but they are questions that shift your perspective from blame to insight. When you are locked in judgment, you only see the behavior. You see the shouting, the absence, the silence, the coldness. But you don't see the fear behind the shouting. You don't see the exhaustion behind the absence. You don't see the emotional numbness behind the silence. You don't see the unhealed wounds behind the coldness. Judgment narrows your view. Compassion expands it. And in that expansion, healing becomes possible because your heart begins to open. Not for her sake, but for your own. As long as you judge your mother only by what she did or did not do, you remain stuck in the role of the wounded child. But healing asks you to evolve, to look beyond right and wrong, to understand that most people are doing the best they can with the tools, awareness, and emotional capacity they have at the time. If your mother didn't show affection, maybe she was never shown it herself. If she was emotionally reactive, maybe she grew up in chaos. If she shut down, maybe that was her only way to survive. Compassion doesn't say, "It's okay. It says, I see more now. I understand better now. I don't have to carry this pain in the same way anymore. Compassion also means turning inward. It means recognizing the places where you've judged yourself because of her actions. If she neglected you, you may have grown up believing you were unworthy. If she criticized you, you may have internalized shame. Compassion asks you to hold that younger version of yourself with gentleness, to tell them that the way they were treated was never a reflection of their value. And when you can do that, you begin to break the cycle, because judgment doesn't just stay locked in the past, it spills into your present. You judge your own reactions, your own emotions, your own struggles. You become harsh with yourself in the same way you were once hurt by her lack of softness. The path of healing requires strength, but not the kind of strength that resists or suppresses. It's the strength to feel, to face the pain, to understand it fully, and to let go of the need for punishment, of her or of yourself. Because when you understand someone deeply, it becomes much harder to hate them. And when you understand yourself deeply, it becomes much harder to abandon yourself. Compassion is not weakness. It is clarity. It is the lens that allows you to see your past not as a prison, but as a teacher. You are not healing her. You are healing the image of her that lives inside you. Often, people embark on healing journeys with an unconscious desire to fix the relationship they had with their mother. They may long for a moment that never came, a conversation that never happened, or an apology that was never offered. There's a hope, sometimes silent and unspoken, that if they can just understand her enough, or forgive her enough, or become whole enough, the past will somehow change, or she will suddenly become the mother they needed her to be. But healing is not about changing her. Healing is about changing your relationship with the version of her that lives inside your psyche, your memories, your emotional reflexes. The mind doesn't just remember events, it stores emotional interpretations. And your mother, being the first emotionally significant figure in your life, became more than just a person. She became a symbol of safety or danger, of love or rejection, of warmth or absence. This inner image of her affects more than just your memory. It colors your self-perception. It shapes how you engage with others, and it influences how you respond to emotional triggers. And yet, this image is often outdated. It was built when you were vulnerable, young, and unable to see the full truth of who she was. As long as that inner image remains unexamined, you are reacting not to who she is today, but to who she was then, or more precisely, to who you believed she was in those formative years. You may feel tension every time you think about her, not because she is doing something wrong now, but because that emotional version of her still lives in your nervous system. Every look, every word, every silence from her shaped how you came to understand your own worth. If she was distant, you may have internalized that love is conditional. If she was overly critical, you may now hold yourself to impossible standards. These are not her current actions. They are the echoes of your interpretation of her long ago. To heal this image is to revisit the emotional records stored inside you and begin to see them with adult awareness. It is to notice how your inner child still responds to her presence, or even just the thought of her. It is to realize that you're no longer at her mercy. You are no longer the helpless child trying to earn her love or attention. You now have the power to reframe the story, to acknowledge what she couldn't give, and to stop defining yourself by her limitations. Healing the inner image means separating who she is from who you needed her to be, and finding peace with both. This process may involve grief, because letting go of the fantasy of the perfect mother means facing the truth of what was lost. But it also brings freedom, because when you stop chasing her emotional validation, you begin to validate yourself. When you stop waiting for her to acknowledge your pain, you start holding space for your own emotions. You learn to meet the needs that were once unmet, not through her, but through your own compassion, your own presence, your own awareness. Healing the image of her also means giving up the role of emotional rescuer. You may have spent years trying to fix her, understand her, carry her pain, or earn her approval. But none of that truly heals you. It only deepens your entanglement with the version of her you wish existed. True healing happens when you gently untangle that version from your identity. When you recognize that you can love her, even honor her, but not define your worth by her capacity to love in return. You are not trying to change her. You are changing the power her image holds within you. You are not erasing her memory. You are transforming your relationship to it, shifting from a space of emotional dependence to one of internal sovereignty. The journey of healing your relationship with your mother is not about changing her, confronting her, or rewriting the past. It's about awakening to the deeper truths within yourself. It's about recognizing that the pain you carry is often rooted in how you interpreted her actions, not just in what actually happened. It's about seeing her not as the flawless guardian you once hoped for, nor as the cause of your every struggle, but as a human being shaped by her own wounds, her own history, and her own limitations. Real healing begins the moment you stop seeking closure from her and start offering understanding to yourself. When you release the judgments, when you dissolve the childhood expectations, when you make peace with the version of her that lives in your memory, you reclaim your emotional freedom. You begin to live not as a reaction to your past, but as a conscious creator of your present. This healing is not an event, it's a quiet unfolding. And in that unfolding, you do not lose your mother. You finally begin to meet her, and more importantly, you finally begin to meet yourself